Hi, my name is Rob Nelson. I'm the author of the CKwargs Project and Sagebox. In this video, I show how we can create keywords by taking the sample CKwargs project and then just modifying it. In the last video, I showed how we can take a program with a lot of default arguments and clean it up a little with standard optional so that we don't have to specify the default. So when I run this program, I have the border color set to yellow. And the great thing is that I don't need to know what the other defaults are because I can just put null opt-in in their place. But as I add more and more defaults, I have to add more and more null ops, and it makes it hard to manage. And that's where keywords come in as a really nice option. So where I can change the border color here to cyan, I have to know what that is positionally in a field of null ops. So what I want to do is I want to use keywords to just express the only things I care about, which in this case are open box and border color. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how we can take the CKwargs example project and change it to our own project and change DrawBox to use these keywords that I just typed out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new project, and then I'm going to bring in the CKwargs project from GitHub. And so it's located at github/sagebox/CKwargs, and then I'm going to name it just CKwargs-example. And so when it loads, we see 4 different sample projects. And so we're interested in sample packed keywords because that gives us the most canonical keyword equal value approach, where the other ones are different flavors that I'm going to describe in other videos, but are also described in the project description on GitHub. So this comes in as a Visual 2019 console mode, so it's converted to Visual Studio 2022, although we can use this on any platform. But let's just go ahead and edit this file to change it over to our DrawBox keyword format. So in this file, you can see that we have our example keywords like range and text, and these are unscoped versions because I have the using namespace KW above, and KW is arbitrarily named. You just name it whatever you want. It can be a class or a structure, and in the above, we have the scoped versions where we're using the KW range and KW text. It really depends on what we want to do. In this case, what we want to do is we want to convert this file into using our DrawBox and the keywords that we want to use. So let's go ahead and copy our main from our original program and then just drop it into our main here. First, let's label the old program. We're going to refer to it later, and so we don't want to delete it yet. So let's drop that in, and then let's go ahead and get the DrawBox function, and let's clean up this file a little bit, and then just drop our DrawBox function right in, and then get it working as we had it working before. So I'm going to get rid of the keywords for now because we need to build those and go to the defaults. I'm going to bring Sagebox in since that's what we use for the DrawBox. And before I compile, I'm going to change the KW. CKwargs comes from Sagebox, so Sagebox uses KW namespace. That's fine. They happily coexist. But I'm going to go ahead and change the KW to : KW in this file, so we're referring to the outer scope instead of the Sagebox scope. And then we can just go ahead and compile. So when we run it, we get the same program we had before. And so what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and take this prototype here for DrawBox and get rid of all the defaults and change them into keywords. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the keywords back and then just let it fail because we're going to build that. So let's use this old code as an example, as a template, and go ahead and change it. Normally we could just keep the keyword namespace KW, but let's go ahead and make a new one just for the example here. And so the first thing we want to do is search for all of the instances that KW are used in the CKwargs project, and it turns out there's only 2 places we need to change. One of those files is in myKeywords.cpp, so let's change KW to DKW for DrawBox keywords. We don't really need to change it, we're just doing it for this example. And the namespace can be a class or a structure. And also in myKeywords.h, we're going to do the same thing, and then we're done. So when we get back to the main file, when we enter DKW, you can see that the red squiggly goes away, but this is the old code, and we're not going to use that. We're only leaving it here for reference. So the next thing we want to do is just locate a keyword that we know is unique. So we're going to search for add border, and then we can use that to start changing over the keywords in the CKwargs example to the keywords we want to use in DrawBox. So now in myKeywords.h, we can see the keywords in the example file. And what we want to do is we want to replace them with our own keywords. And so now we have our border color and other keywords that we can just drop right in, which is conveniently the same number in the example. Now what we want to do is we want to specify the types. And so we know the first 2 are RGB color, and then we have an integer and a Boolean. So we go back to the keywords.h file and then fill in the types in these macros below. So we know the first 2 are RGB color, and we have an integer and a Boolean. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Sage RGB color to show that we're using the Sage namespace. And I'm going to include Sagebox. And that is just for this project. For your own project, you'd use something else. And so I'm including Sagebox.h just to resolve the type. So this is very project specific. And so now all we have to do is go to the CPP file, mykeywords.cpp, and then just pretty much copy and paste everything. What we do is we select the new keywords that we have, and then we just drop them in everywhere we see them in the .cpp file. Now we just need to put in the types that we had before, the two RGB color types, the integer and the Boolean. We keep the variable name value because it's used in the macro. So when we put in the types here, we're done with this file. And then now all we have to do is edit our H file, mykeywords.h, to set up the keyword translation. In mykeywords.h, which is our public interface, I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm just copying in the new keywords, and I'm going to put the underscores back in. We have to remember the underscores. But we're using the CKwargs example file as a template so that we can do this easily. And then in the next video, I'm going to show how we add keywords. So notice this comment here. I'm going to show this when I get this program running, but this allows us to have a comment and the Intellisense to show the comment when we're using the keywords in our function. So the only thing I have to do now is to put in the types that we had before, the two RGB colors. And the name RGB color here is arbitrary, it's just the interface. So I'm going to put in the two RGB colors and the integer and the Boolean, and now we're completely done defining our keywords. So now all we have to do is modify our DrawBox function to use the keywords. So let's go to mykeywords.cpp to make sure it compiles. I obviously made a mistake here, so let me fix that. But we should just be able to compile it. And once it compiles, we know that our keywords are completely set. So let's go back to our original program. Remember, we kept that around. And so let's look at SomeFunction because that represents what we want to do with DrawBox. So in SomeFunction.h, this represents our DrawBox function, our intended function. And this template is how we pass our keywords to our function. And this is the public part of the interface. Whereas the original, the top line here, is your private function, the intended function that we're going to call. So let's go ahead and copy this and then bring it into our main file and then transform it into our DrawBox function that uses keywords. To do that, we copy this one declaration, which is our interface to our keywords, is how we pass them, and we'll replace all of our default parameters with this one declaration. So now we can get rid of the SomeFunction declaration here. And now we can work on the interface. And what we can do is we can copy the DrawBox function prototype, except for the keywords, and then paste it in to the template we have as an example, and then just call our DrawBox. And now we just have one more thing to do, and that is implement the keywords in the DrawBox function itself. So as you can see, when we enter DKW, the red squigglies go away because it's actually passing the keywords to the DrawBox function. So now let's alter DrawBox to use the keywords that it's getting passed. So let's just copy and paste from our SomeFunction.cpp since we're using it as a template. It uses a function called CKWGet. And for that, we need to use the namespace CKwargs, but we can just bring that inline in the function and then use the same get function in our DrawBox function. So let's go ahead and copy what we're doing with CKW keys here. And then what we can do is we can just replace the optional value or with our get function. And now we have our keyword. So what I can do here is I can just copy all of this and then put in the values and keyword names as appropriate. And then we're basically completely done. The rest is just cleaning up some of the example code that we brought in with the CKwargs template. So let's clean this up a little bit and then differentiate between the interface function and the main function. And so this template function is your interface. It passes the keywords as a packed parameter. And this needs to be in your H file or otherwise visible at compile time. But the upper function, this DrawBox function here, is your private function, which is your intended function, and it really just never needs to change except to maybe adapt to new keywords that you might add and that sort of thing. So this does not need to be public in the interface at all. So now we just need to delete all that extra code we had from our original sample project. And so we can delete all this code in main that we don't need anymore, and we can delete SomeFunction.cpp and SomeFunction.h, since those are just sample files. And now we have successfully created a program that uses keywords. And we can use keywords in DrawBox and other functions. And so when we run it, we get exactly the same thing we had before, but now we're using keywords. So now I can just focus on the keywords I want. And it also makes our function call more descriptive. So I can just set openbox here without worrying about any of the other defaults. So when I run it, now we have a filled rectangle. And so now I'm going to add another keyword called border size and set it to 50, but it's going to generate an error. That's because I didn't use the DKW namespace qualifier. So what I can do is I can use that, or I can just enter using namespace DKW, and then I can just take DKW away from everything to make the interface a little bit cleaner. So this works for some projects, and for others you might want to keep the namespace, so it's just an option to keep in mind. So let's change the border size to 5, but then let's move it over to the front to show that we can use these keywords in any order. So let me show you a couple more things about how to use the keywords. So if I misspell a keyword, we get a nice error message that's kind of plain and simple. And sometimes in C++ with templates, it's not exactly straightforward, but this kind of nicely tells us what our error is. And so what I can do is I can enter DKW : and that will tell me what all of the keywords are. I can also document the keywords in a way that they can display to the user by just entering comments above the keyword. So in border size and open box, I'm going to go ahead and document those, and then when I come back to the main program, you can see when I put the mouse over border size, it tells me what it does. So now when I'm entering a keyword, I can just enter the keyword namespace and a partial keyword, and I'll get a list of keywords, and I can scroll down and get the documentation on what the keywords do as I'm entering them. So let me clean this up a little bit in preparation for the next video by putting the border color back to yellow and then centering the rectangle. So now we have a nice rectangle in the middle of the screen ready for our next video, and we don't need this DKW here since we're saying using namespace DKW. So this really shows the result we're looking for, a nice clean interface that uses keywords instead of default arguments. And that's just one function call. If we look at the entire function and we add a few calls with boxes and circles and controls, the keywords are really nice because it helps keep the interface clean and self-documenting all at the same time. In the next video, I'm going to show how we can add this angle keyword to the keyword definition file on top of the ones we already have. Okay, so that's really it for adding keywords. It's a pretty easy process. And in the next video, I'm going to show how we can add keyword definitions to the keyword definition file as we add more and more keywords. It's a pretty easy process. It takes about 1 or 2 minutes total. And that's it. Thanks for watching.